Are you a radio enthusiast?
A research student?
Or a curious thinker looking for an adventure?
If this sounds like you, welcome to
the second episode of The Summer I Found My Spark, a podcast where we interview Adelphi's brightest minds to learn about their summer research experience. We'll be asking students how they could discover their topic, reached out to mentors, the setbacks they faced, and the advice that they have for future researchers. My name is Maci.
And I'm Errah. Today's episode is brought to you in collaboration with the Sparks Research Center, where curiosity meets innovation. Each summer, the Sparks Centers fund students to take on independent research projects across various disciplines.
Whether you're interested in computer sciences, dance, literature, or public health, there's something for every listener with a curious take on life. So keep your ears sharp, for this podcast might just leave you inspired or searching for your own spark. To find out more, please visit the Sparks Instagram page and website linked in our description.
Today we're joined by Hemish Naidoo, a pre-med senior in the Honors College majoring in molecular neuroscience with double minors in Asian Studies and Biology. This summer, Hemish was a Sparks Fellow under the mentorship of Dr. Cohen. He explored how language and memory interact in emotionally negative social settings, a project that sits right at the crossroads of neurolinguistics, memory, and psychology. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, Errah and Maci. Thank you for having me here. As Errah wonderfully put it, I'm Hemish. I'm a senior molecular neuroscience major. And yeah, over the past summer, with my advisor, Dr. Emily Cohen, we had done a research project, or I should say started a project, on memory consolidation and language. So we sort of modified the project since then. So instead of looking strictly at negative social context, what we're looking at now is we're essentially analyzing when participants watch a movie, right? And I guess now this is kind of a summary and overview of the research that we've done so far. So kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but we're looking at when people watch a movie and they're given time, let's say a week, to consolidate it, right? That's what we call updating the memory. We want to see, well, what do they talk about that's different? What is more accurate? What changes? Is there more emotional words? What about the language is different? So that's what we're looking at right now. It's also, what's nice is that it's a simple study in design, but it looks at something really novel because not too many studies have looked at movies as stimuli. They look at pictures or word pairs, which is fine, but that's static stimuli, which isn't really representative of the real world, which is more dynamic. So by using movies as that stimuli, we're sort of opening up a new field when it comes to consolidation memory research.
That's fascinating. I've never heard of a study using that before. I think that's so interesting that you guys took that initiative and changed your stimuli to be more representative of real world interaction. Obviously, Hemish, you and I we know each other from many things, but you and I were also part of the BISA Global Learning Group earlier this year, where we toured India for 11 days. And your research there kind of followed a similar pattern. So it looked at language deficits and neurodegenerative diseases among Hindi-speaking populations. And I know that your grandfather's experience with Broca's aphasia inspired this path as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how your life experiences have shaped your interest in studying language from a molecular and cognitive perspective?
Absolutely, yeah. So as you put it, my interest is in language research, neuroscientific language research. All of it started a few years ago. I had lived with my late grandfather. I call him my Aja, my paternal grandfather. And we were really close growing up as a kid. My parents would work a lot. They were immigrants. So most of the time he would be the one who would take care of me and help raise me. So we had a very close connection. I considered him my best friend growing up. And then as he aged, due to a combination of injuries that he sustained earlier in his life, and along with just general neurodegeneration as you get older, he essentially developed, like you said, Broca's aphasia, which is a condition where the patients affected, they can't produce comprehensible speech. They can understand what you're saying, but they can't produce a response in turn. And this happened when I was still very young as a kid, before I was even entering my adolescence. So it was a very difficult time because I felt like our relationship eroded because we just couldn't communicate clearly with each other. And again, because I was a child, I couldn't understand what was going on. So I was very frustrated. I was frustrated at him. And it was just sort of like a void, obviously a growing void in my heart because we just kept getting further and further apart until he passed away. And it wasn't until after he passed away and I sort of was able to, because at this time I was already in high school, about to enter college, I was reminiscing on the whole experience, and I remembered that our doctor had diagnosed him, but there wasn't really much more that could be done in terms of treatment, in terms of assisting him. So I've always wondered, like, if more could have been done, if more was available, if there was more options at the time. And this was also at a time where I was applying to universities, and I was still sort of on the fence about where I wanted to take my career. There was a part of me since I was a child that wanted to be a doctor. I was always fascinated by that. I always wanted to pursue that. But at the same time, through the combination of burnout and just being like sort of confused about my future, I was also looking at other options like economics or engineering. So I was sort of like at a crossroads, unsure where to go. But I felt in that moment, if there was like one thing that I really wanted to dedicate my life to go after it, to find answers to, it would be being able to research neuroscience, being able to research neuroscience, being able to help out people like other people's grandparents who suffer with similar conditions. So that was what primarily motivated me to undergo the pre-medical path, major in neuroscience, and do the research that I do now. So yeah, I first started off at Adelphi when I was a sophomore. I joined Dr. Seljana Lusic's neuroscience lab, neurobiology of language and behavior. And that was when I really went to my first foray with language research. During the summer after my sophomore year, due to assistance from the Spark Center and a fellowship by Honors College, I was able to start a systematic review of connected speech differences and similarities between two disorders. One is schizophrenia, which is like more like a sort of a psychiatric syndrome, and the other is a subset of dementia, behavioral variant frontotemporal, which essentially affects executive function like speech, and that's more neurodegeneration. So I'm still doing that with my mentor. She's now at FSU in Florida, Florida State University, but we're still continuing the systematic review. We've made a lot of progress. We're done with most of this preliminary review, and we have like a rough draft for our manuscript.
Ooh.
So we're sort of, thank you.
Very exciting.
I am, yeah. We're just ironing out the edges a little bit so that we can hopefully get it published soon. And it was really great because I learned for the first time not just how to do research, how to do systematic reviews, but also I learned so much more about these diseases, how they affect people and how they're treated, that I felt I would have never been able to pursue and understand just from my general classes. So I'm very grateful to have that opportunity, yeah. And as well, you mentioned the BSA research. I've gone on for a bit, but just like very quickly. So I was also want to continue that type of research with by analyzing it from like a more global perspective. And so I want to look at in Hindi-speaking populations, right? Because India has like so many languages, and they're all so different from each other. They're not like dialects; they're like completely different. I was like, how do they deal with the problems that we deal with in the U.S.? Because sure, the U.S. is also diverse, but generally we can sort of keep track of all the languages. There's a lot of people that are becoming more and more bilingual, especially in younger generations. But in a country like India, it's just a little bit more complicated. So yeah, I was very grateful through the BSA Center at Adelphi to be able to work on that and present a poster at Adelphi's research conference.
Well, firstly, congratulations on the manuscript. I didn't know we had an author up in the studio.
Thank you.
And secondly, thank you so much for sharing your emotional story of your Ajaji. That was beautiful, and it's so transformative how you were able to take that experience and turn it into something robust. You were able to work on a systematic review with your professors, and it's really inspiring for all our listeners as well. So you mentioned how you worked with Dr. Lukic. And then you also did the BSA Global Fellows. You were also a Sparks. You've been all over the campus. You've been part of multiple labs and research teams. How has your experience been your mentors, multiple ones, and how has that shaped your perspective of understanding speech and cognition beyond academia?
Yeah, absolutely. So with my first mentor, Professor Lukic, she was strictly into linguistic research on like the more cognitive neuroscience realm. So I think that was a great foray, because when I first started in her lab, she introduced me to all the different projects that her and her research assistants were undertaking. We all discussed ideas with each other. And again, we did like a lot of reading that would later pave the way for a systematic review. And that just in general was very educational, very informative, because I feel as someone that wants to become a neurologist and specialize in like linguistic disorders and similar pathologies, that having this knowledge now as an undergraduate, not just like what the diseases are, of course, but how clinicians approach them, how they research them, how they assess them, what findings they have, what more needs to be found. Just having that is such a huge stepping stone for helping me decide what I want to pursue further, whether it be in terms of like clinical research, or if I want to even like, let's say, switch gears slightly, maybe even do like psychiatry. Well, I also have knowledge now of psychiatric syndromes like schizophrenia that would affect language. So it's in a way very interdisciplinary, because it helps with so many different fields of medicine, because of course linguistic disorders are common and prevalent, and we still don't have that many treatments. We of course have like things like speech therapies, but in terms of addressing the root cause in like a strictly like allopathic medical sense, there's a lot more that needs to be done. So just having that introduction, having that like my foot in the door essentially, super helpful. And now with Professor Emily Cohen from the Derner School of Psychology, her research focus is actually specifically, again, cognitive neuroscience, but more towards like adaptive memory and memory consolidation. So slightly different from what I'm doing with language. However, by being able to come up with a research project that sort of intersects the two. So like I said, we are testing participants' like memory for our current project by having them do like a verbal recall, right? So like when you talk about a movie, like a dynamic stimuli, the idea is that it will be similar to how like a person would narrate stories from like their own memory, right? Because they're both dynamic. They both have like emotional scenes, like, you know, like a rising action, a climax, a falling action. They all follow the same structure. And then we're going to look at the specific parts of language and how they communicate it, like parts of speech, like nouns, verbs, so on. Speech rate, like how fluently, how fast are they speaking? How many emotional words, right? Like this can be done with like computer analysis, but like, are they using a lot of emotional words, like less emotional words? And a lot of the ideas that we're incorporating into our analysis came from what I learned from my systematic review with Dr. Lukic. And without that prior experience, I don't think I would have been able to work together with Professor Cohen to help this design a study that was able to focus on those linguistic variables while still being able to contribute to our knowledge about memory consolidation, adaptive memory. So, I mean, I guess to sum it all up, it was really nice how everything sort of like work together and build off each other. And even from my India project, I learned how clinicians, immediately provide immediate relief to those with linguistic disorders. And while it may not necessarily be related to the more like long-term allopathic treatments that we're looking for, just having that idea as well can help inform things like diagnosis and next steps. So yeah, it all just works together, comes together, and I felt like I wouldn't have been able to work on what I'm doing right now if not for what I had started prior.
You've had such a robust research experience. It's very impressive. We love to hear stuff like this. I'm so glad to hear that your mentors have been helpful in guiding you along this like journey of discovery, especially when it comes to your specific research interests that you've been consistent with throughout all sorts of different research. Let's talk a little bit about your Sparks project. So you mentioned that it's changed a bit since you began developing it, but quantifying linguistic differences in the verbal communication of memory across negative social contexts, right? Complex and fascinating. We're very interested to hear more about this. For all of our non-STEM listeners, could you tell us a little bit about like the process, the investigation process, the questions you were thinking about answering, just kind of like the day-to-day of what this research looked like for you this summer?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So the research that I started during the summer with the aid of the Sparks Center began in the spring semester. My professor and I, we were just simply brainstorming ideas. And of course, in order to brainstorm, we started with a literature review. So in the articles that I was looking at, I found that a lot of researchers had already try to quantify linguistic differences, but with using different types of stimuli. So, for example, like I said before, let's say that you give someone like a picture. You're like, okay, look at this picture. You have a few seconds. That would be called like the encoding phase, where you're trying to like just remember what you're looking at. And then they would be given either immediately or maybe after a short delay. They would just be asked to narrate everything that they remember. And the process of narrating what they remember is called retrieval of memory, because you're sort of getting it from like your storage, right? So like think of it as like getting it, like plucking it from your brain and trying to like just tell it to someone else. So it's complicated because there's so many steps. You have to first look at the stimuli, right? You have to encode it or remember it. You have to store it. So, because obviously if you store it, then you can't retrieve it. Then you have to plug it from your brain, right? Retrieve it. And then you have to find a way to take the memory and put it into words so that it accurately describes what you had encoded and stored. So there's a lot of processes involved. And like I said before, surprisingly, a lot of these studies did not use like more dynamic stimuli like movies or even like a game, which was surprising for me at least, because again, you would think that if you want to test how memory works in the brain, you'd want to use stimuli that is more representative of what we see day to day, which of course is like more like a movie, right? It's dynamic, it's constantly changing and evolving. It doesn't just stay the same always. And some studies did look at that, but they also didn't necessarily fully take into account the role of consolidation. So consolidation, you can think of it as like updating a memory. Using the picture as an example again, you look at a picture, you encode it, you store it. That memory is considered fragile. It can easily be forgotten. It can easily be changed into something completely different when you try to retrieve it. So when you give your essentially like your brain, you give it time to consolidate it, which just happens over a course of a few days, right? That allows your brain to sort of like solidify it. I guess a good analogy would be like, let's say like you're like a bricklayer and you're trying to like put bricks on. So you put your cement, you put the brick, and then you wait for it to dry. Like waiting for it to dry can be considered like consolidation, because that's where you really cement the memory into your storage so that it doesn't go anywhere. So yeah, and a lot of studies didn't really, again, like look at that intersection between dynamic stimuli with movies, because it's kind of like a trend in modern memory research to use movies now, very recent, and then to combine it with how consolidation affects it, and also like as well like things like sleep, for example. That will be a process of consolidation. When you sleep, right, like when you have a dream, when you're in deep sleep, yeah, your brain is trying to like consolidate everything that you remembered in the day. So in our study, we decided that we would have one participant, one group. You would have one group of participants watch a short movie. It's actually a really cute movie. It's about like this like cat, kitten, and dog becoming best friends, like 7 minutes. And then they would do a recall immediately. So no time for consolidation. They just talk about everything they immediately remember. Immediate retrieval. Then we give them about 1 week to consolidate it, sleep it off, just let it sit there, marinate, whatever. And then they come back a week later and they don't watch the movie again, but they do the recall again. And the idea is that we're going to see differences in the recall that we can quantify. So again, specifically like what types of words, how many emotional words, what parts of the movie they're recalling more, stuff like that. And then we're going to look at those differences and then see what we can conclude from it. Our study is also novel in that we're adding a second group. The second group will also watch the movie, but they won't do a recall immediately. They watch the movie, they leave, and then they'll come back a week and do the recall. So why are we doing this? Well, because I mentioned that when you come back a week, you consolidate the memory and you retrieve it. But what can also happen is that instead of remembering the movie you watched, your brain can also remember the first time you did the recall. So instead of remembering the movie, you're just recalling the memory of the first recall, if that makes sense, like memory inception, which isn't really what we're trying to investigate, right? We don't want to like look at, okay, how good is the brain doing at consolidating memories from a recall? No, it's just consolidating memories from the stimuli. Although we are interested, like it can be fascinating to look at again, like what I can remember from the recall. You want to make sure that the effects aren't due to just that first recall. So that's why we have the second group as sort of like almost like a control group, just to make sure that if there are differences due to that first recall, we can see what they are. And in terms of the negative social context, so you sort of expanded that. We're not strictly looking at negative, like linguistic words, but both negative and positive, essentially highly emotional words, which is just one part of many of our analysis. So that's one of the ways how we sort of been able to branch it out and expand it.
This reminds me of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, if I'm correct. I remember studying that in one of my biology classes, and I think it's one of the best studying depths for like active recall. Can be just so efficient when you're studying. And I'm wondering, just on that vein, who is your sample? Like, what is your sample? Are you looking at college students? Are you looking at older participants? And in your research results, have you found that participants were able to recall the climax of the video or like much more frequently, or were there more emotional scenes within the film that they were able to pick up on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our participants for now are going to be mostly college undergraduates. Officially, like, we are maxing it at participants aged 40 because, of course, as you age, your ability to retrieve memory tends to become impaired. That's just due to general, like, as you age, neurons can tend to die more quickly than they can regenerate. And we don't want to add any, like, confounding variables or anything that could implicate the results. So just for this study, we are looking at a younger demographic who have yet to have those memory impairments, so we can just get a broad idea of how the brain functions. In terms of the second part, that's actually what one part of many of our study that's actually extremely novel, in that no study, at least to my knowledge so far, has looked at how well a participant remembers, let's say, the climax versus the falling action versus the exposition versus the conclusion. So that's one new thing that we're hoping to reveal with our study and see what we can draw from that, like extrapolate from that. There are previous studies, however, that do show that participants tend to have better memory, or I should say like a better recall performance on stimuli that we call it like more salient or more emotionally salient. So essentially, like, to put it another way, it has more emotional content. So you watch a movie, what are you more likely to remember? Like the beginning where the protagonist is narrating like some background information, or like midway or like towards the end during the climax when they like rob a bank? 9 times out of 10, right, most people would probably remember more details from the climax and other sections. But again, no study to date have definitively proved that. So it is part of our hypotheses, that we are expecting participants to recall more, not more, but have, let's say, like a more accurate recall for the emotional parts of the movie, and likewise use more emotional words for the said emotional parts. But until we run the study and collect our results, we don't know yet, but that is what we are expecting,
That's fascinating. I know that there have been phenomenon where intense episodes of emotional presence tend to overwhelm the hippocampus, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You guys are the neuroscience majors here. I'm psychology, but can overwhelm the hippocampus and prevent recall from happening. This happens when we see like trauma blocks come up for memory. Do these types of things impact your hypothesis at all when it comes to intense emotional episodes versus like do you measure the level of emotional salience?
Yeah, no, another amazing question. So yeah, like the hippocampus, there's multiple regions of the hippocampus, and not just the hippocampus, but other regions of the cerebral cortex in general that interact with the hippocampus that affects memory. Predominantly, it's the CA1 region of the hippocampus that is usually involved in memory retrieval. For the purposes of our study, my professor, my advisor, Dr. Emily Cohen, she specializes in what's called systems consolidation. So I think now's a good time to clarify. You have two types of memory consolidation. You have memory consolidation on the cellular level between neurons. That's called like cellular consolidation or synaptic consolidation. And you also have cellular consolidation in terms of how different brain regions work together. That is systems consolidation. So Dr. Emily Cohen specializes in the systems consolidation. So not necessarily looking at just one brain region, looking how, let's say, how neurons change, right? Because synapses can, like if a certain like synaptic pathway is firing more, then that'll be strengthened. And if it's firing less, that'll be weakened. But we're looking at, well, we can make conclusions based on our results. Let's say let's say that during our results, hypothetically, right, we find out that during the second recall, so 1 week later after consolidation, more emotional words are used. So then during our discussion, we would say, okay, here is the brain region that is implicated with storage, consolidation, or retrieval, and it could be multiple brain regions, but just saying if there's one, like hypothetically. This is the brain region that's implicated. What does this tell us about how the brain region operates in terms of consolidating dynamic stimuli, and so and so. One thing that I would like to do in the future, maybe perhaps as like after I graduate or as a medical school student, would be to do a study that does involve neuroimaging, like let's say fMRI, which would tell us exactly what brain regions are most active, like through the bold signal, like which ones light up more, have a higher contrast, which brain regions are most active during those memory consolidation processes. Since our study is more behavioral in nature, we're mostly going to sort of mention possible explanations for that in the discussion, and that'll be like the backbone and basis for future research. Because again, this is novel in many ways, so we're sort of just trying to like lay the foundation that could lead to more specific and specialized studies in the future.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. This is such an interdisciplinary study for you. You're combining neuroscience with linguistics, emotion, cognition, all sorts of things. Can you talk to us a little bit about how your minors in Asian studies and biology complement your research?
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up my minors because I've been having a lot of time with them. So, like you said, one of my minors is biology, that has been really fun, actually. I think notably, as a part of the minor, I've had to take anatomy as well as research project lab, and both of them are so cool because in anatomy you obviously get to learn the specific brain regions, of course, how they function, how they operate, so similar to like neurobiology, but you also learn the different neurotransmitters, the different types of synapses. Again, they all these courses sort of like build on top of each other, and it's nice because it gives me an idea of like, let's say I'm doing my research and I think, oh, this participant is recalling, let's say, like more parts of speech. Oh, that could be like that brain region and that synapse and that neurotransmitter is being used, you know? So it's nice because it helps me to get an idea of what could be going on in the brain as all of this is happening, which can later inform my ability to sort of flesh out the results like in the discussion, pave way for future research and so on. In terms of my Asian studies minor, that one has been a very fun minor for me. A lot of fun courses. I think it was most beneficial for me when I was doing my research for the BSA, the BSA trip and the BSA program, because as a part of the Asian Studies minor, I had to take sociology and humanities courses related to Asian history, East Asia, South Asia, and I think having that general knowledge of Asian societies, because they do share broad similarities between different countries, and having that knowledge of sort of like their cultural and linguistic past through like humanities courses, of course, I think all of that together was able to help inform me on how I should sort of direct that project, and what I guess specific facets are of importance, what I should be looking at. Like, for example, how does like the role of like what are like, let's say, stigmas in Indian society that could affect how people seek out resources to help with their linguistic disorders. Like for instance, that would be necessary to know as I'm trying to design like a study or design my systematic review and figure out why these researchers got the studies in the way that they did. But even up to now, I mean, just being able to like have that ability to just sift through like hundreds of pages of documents, as you do in a lot of humanities classes, having that knowledge of how societies around the world operate, not just in Asia, but in other parts of the world, I think they're all interconnected in the ability for people to seek out not just seek out help, like I said prior, seek out help for these disorders, but also potentially what could cause or facilitate these disorders. And I think understanding those obstacles first is essential if we want to be able to continue our research and find viable solutions, or at least begin the path to finding those viable treatments for those in most need.
I think it's really interesting to see how well you've meshed your two minors together, just because, I mean, at first glance, Asian studies and biology don't really seem interconnected, but I find that your quality to connect everything back to your primary goal of linguistics is very fascinating. And you mentioned in the beginning your aspirations of becoming a doctor and, you know, pursuing that within medicine as well. It was really important, especially within the current climate of how America's healthcare system is heading. We had DIE initiatives. I'm interested how your current background and just knowledge within Asian studies and biology will help you to become the doctor that you aspire to be, and this is something you hope to pursue in med school as well.
Related to my Asian studies minor, but a little different. When we went on the BSA trip, Maci and I and 5 others along with our professors, one of the places that we went to was Goa Medical College.
Yes.
Yeah. And for me, that was the highlight of the trip. Not just because I'm a pre-medical student, like, oh, you know, medicine, wow, you know, part of it, sure, yeah. But also because I was just so fascinated at how efficiently they were able to operate despite having, on paper, so many more obstacles and difficulties than what we find here in the US. I mean, in India, statistically, right, a lot of their citizens have a low GDP per capita. I'm not necessarily going to use the word like impoverished because that can be relative, but regardless, they're not making the same, let's say, income, or their standards of living may not be to the same extent that we see here in the US or in the West. And it's so much people. I mean, India is a country of like, almost 1.5 billion people now. Even Goa, a tiny state, has like millions upon millions of people in it, despite being smaller than like, I don't know, Rhode Island or something. And despite that, these doctors and researchers at Goa Medical College were doing studies with 10,000 to like 100,000 people. It was insane. And then they told us how in Goa, they were able to subsidize healthcare for their citizens by using a combination of private and public initiatives, both from like the state government, federal government, the hospital itself, and to combat challenges that you wouldn't find in the US. Like, for example, because there's so many people in India, as Maci and I can attest to, the traffic there is absolutely insane. So obviously you're wondering, well, what if an ambulance gets stuck in traffic? Does the patient just die? Well, they have specific like solution to this. They have ambulances parked like on the side of highways. They have like certain protocols that they keep in mind. And they just have what is, I can only describe as like a state-of-the-art like cosmopolitan curriculum. Like in addition to all like straight science courses, they take a lot of like humanities courses like philosophies, sociology, social sciences, and it's all towards the end of trying to help create more, of course, empathetic doctors that can analyze wider variables besides just strictly looking at finding a cure. And that's something that we've struggled with in the US for years, and we still haven't fully resolved. Sure, yeah, we have things like on the MCAT, or the medical college admissions tests, where now there's more psychology, sociology, critical analysis, all to get medical students thinking more and more about those other variables that affect healthcare. But in a lot of ways, the US is still lagging behind. And despite not having a population nearly as large as India, and despite having citizens who are statistically more well off, and despite having institutions, private medical institutions, as well as public institutions that have a higher budget than India, still in the US, we see healthcare prices skyrocket with not necessarily any remedy. Especially considering recent developments, it doesn't look like it's going to improve anytime soon. And as well, we've seen in the news, we've seen in the past, and there's talks going on about more cuts to medical research funding. Well, we charge our citizens exorbitant prices, and we don't even use that money to invest in having the best healthcare and medical care. So, what's kind of going on? If a country that is so overburdened like India, and India is just obviously one of many Asian countries who have problems like these, can find their own unique solutions. I mean, what's stopping us? And it's definitely, on one hand, as someone that is going into the medical field, of course, it does concern me, because these are problems that I, along with many other of my peers, will have to deal with going into the next few years, next few decades. But on the other hand, I am cautiously optimistic, because by having a more global perspective given to me by my Asian Studies minor, by the basic program, I have at least a rough idea or a rough roadmap of proposals that we can just bring forth to the table and at least start talking about to see if we can try and pave a better roadmap.
Absolutely. I think that I remember having a very emotionally profound conversation. I think after we left Goa Medical College, the group of us were discussing how impactful we found it to see that this level of care was still being provided, disregarding all of the obstacles that you mentioned, where it was like, it seems that there would be so many more provisional situations that are causing people to not be receiving a certain level of care, and yet they're still making it happen. And I think that you, as a global citizen, being able to see that and understand that there is an issue that needs to be solved in regards to our own medical system and in regards to your research specifically, seeing that that's something that you're passionate about and that you're making steps to pursue academically and professionally, I think is very inspiring. And it's great to see that we have people that care about those things. So every researcher has oh no moments, as we like to call them here, where the project idea you spent weeks on refining gets shot down, or the results you're hoping to get backfires. We love getting, a non-correlational results or something like that, where the results aren't significant as you wanted them to be. But a failure is a fundamental success when it comes to research. Did you experience any oh no moments this summer? And if so, how did you deal with those rejections and setbacks?
Absolutely. Yeah, it happens all the time during the research process. Off the top of my head, over the summer, my mentor and I, we had started coding our project. So we use specific softwares like PsychoPy to create essentially what participants would see when they enter the lab and they take the behavioral task. And constantly throughout, when we were coding it, we were like, oh no, is this stimuli? Should we use this movie? Or should we use this movie where this person's family dies, or is that too much? Little questions like that, and they may seem trivial and inconsequential, but they can have a huge role in terms of how the results play out. So you're constantly going through 20 review papers, 20 studies in a few minutes, trying to figure out what's the best course of action. It's so stressful. You wonder oh, is this right? Is the phrasing wrong? Am I telling the participant too much? Am I not acknowledging the participant's ability to do a recall? Another example, a little bit towards the end of the summer, when we were drafting up our IRB, we were extremely worried that because we were recording participant voices, that could be considered a breach in, of course, participant privacy. And my mentor and I, for a while, we were trying to figure out, how do we work this out? How do we tell the IRB that no, it's confidential, we're just gonna analyze it? But then if we say we're analyzing it, that's a whole nother rabbit hole of well, what do you mean by analyze? Are you using a classifier? You're going to store it. So you have to essentially be so specific and pay so much attention to detail throughout the process. But also with everything else in the research process, being able to just keep a calm head, meet with your mentor, meet with your colleagues, and just take the time to just throw ideas, right? Mention, okay, this is what I found in X paper, so we should implement Y solution. And your mentor could be oh, actually, in this paper, I actually saw they did Z solution and had better effects, but their stimuli was slightly different. So you're essentially finding a way to mesh so many, really it feels like hundreds of ideas at once, and sort of blending it into this I don't know, this weird blob of research, progression. But it's one of the fun things about research. It's what keeps me going. And I think ultimately the satisfaction that you get from overcoming these obstacles, whether it be trying to figure out how to draft up a study, how to draft up an IRB, what specific data you should include, it's contributes, all in all, they're necessary setbacks, I would call them. So that way, in the end, you have something that is relevant to your research interests, explore something novel, and all in all, it's just an extremely fun and rewarding and gratifying process.
I think coding in computational research can be such a nightmare for students who have zero coding experience. I did R with my professor over this summer.
Me too, yeah.
And I was just writing the script over and over again, waiting for her feedback. And like you said, there's such a blessing and a curse side to this, where it kind of asks you, demands you even, to slow down, to look at things with such detail. And it can be, again, a learning experience. So Hemish, we have one final question for you now. There are many students who are and will be working on their Sparks applications, their honors senior theses, their capstone projects. What wisdom would you like to impart on anyone who wants to do research but finds the process intimidating? How does one go about even emailing them in the first place? And if you could go back to the beginning of your research journey, what would you tell yourself?
Ooh, that's a lot to unpack there. First, what would I tell to people who are currently in the process? I would say don't be afraid to ask. It sounds cliche, but truly, every time I talk to an underclassmen, they're like, oh, I don't know if I should reach out to this professor. I don't know if I should ask this person. I don't want to bother them. Like, no, don't be afraid. Just ask. Trust me. Like, whenever people ask me about my research, I'm always happy to tell them tips and suggestions. Like, for example, you mentioned how do they reach out? Well, one thing you can do, for example, is, and this is what helped me in the beginning, I use the Adelphi professor directory, and on it, all the professors, there'll be a section on it for each professor that tells you what their research interests are, and they'll also tell you if they recently advised or worked as an advisor for any student works. So that's nice because it tells you two things. One, it tells you if the professor is doing research relevant to your interests, which of course is a big factor in determining if you want to be a part of the lab and if they'll want to take you on. And number two, it'll also tell you if this professor does research for students in general, because I guarantee you, if they do any research at all with undergraduates, they would love you to email them. Like, really, you are not bothering them. It doesn't even matter if you're a freshman. And this kind of goes back to what you asked me last, like what I do if I was different. I would reach out the minute I enrolled, honestly, because professors, like, even when you're a freshman and you're still new and you still have a lot to learn, they don't mind taking you on. They don't mind teaching you the research process, because so long as you're passionate about the research, so long as you want to commit yourself and work towards something, whether it be a presentation or a paper or some sort of project, your professor will not ever view you as a bother, as an annoyance. They would want to do everything in their power to take you in and just help sort of like train you up to be a good research assistant. And if you do all of that and you're still sort of confused, like for example, after my old mentor, Dr. Lukic, left Adelphi, there weren't that many professors left who specifically looked at language in the university. So what I did at first, I talked to some upperclassmen who did their own research in neuroscience. They gave me some tips and pointers. Then from there, I reached out to professors and I was like, hey, I'm interested in linguistic research. Do you know any professors who would also be interested in this? And just by asking around, I was able to stumble upon Dr. Cohen. I reached out to her, and despite having, again, different research interests on paper, because I expressed to her how passionate I was about doing research, how much I love neuroscience research, when I was clear to her, like, how much I invest in it and how much I just appreciate it in general, she was able to train me. She taught me a lot about how memory research works. And now because of that, I sort of have like a more interdisciplinary view of neuroscience research. So please don't be afraid to ask out, ask your upperclassmen, cold email professors, use the directory, start as early as you can. Some students want to wait because they feel as if they need to be qualified to join a research lab. There is no such thing. The only qualification is if you have the passion and if you have the commitment, and that's it. And if you can just convey that through your emails, if you want to meet with them in person, I'm sure most professors would be more than happy to have you. It also helps too, because a lot of labs here have some wait lists. So starting early will help you get into a lab earlier, assuming that there are those wait lists. So yeah, that's what I would say. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to connect. Use all of Adelphi's resources at your disposal. And then just find, if you want to do research, but you don't necessarily quite know what field you want to go into, then I would say maybe wait one semester, take a few classes your first semester, maybe second semester, just so you yourself can find out what interests you the most. And then that would give you something compelling to talk about to a potential mentor. So yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for your time. Thank you for sharing your story of dedication and resilience with our listeners. If you have any questions about Hemish's project or would like to collaborate, you can contact him via his email, which is included in our episode description.
And thank you to the Sparks Research Center for sponsoring this episode and continuing to support student innovation across campus. If you want to learn more about how to get involved with Sparks or apply for next summer's program, check out their page on the university website. We'll link it in the episode description.
Thank you guys for having me. This was so fun. And yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'll be more than happy to help you guys.
Wonderful. And that wraps up today's episode of PAWS Radio. So until next time, stay tuned and stay curious. We'll catch you in our next episode of The Summer I Found My Spark.